Hi guys, good morning. I'm Dhaiwat, and like Mega said, I work as a developer advocate at a company called Anchor. Uh, before before getting into Web3 and all of that, I used to be a software engineer for 4 years, mostly working with React. Uh, I have worked with my fair share of UI libraries, built a lot of them. Most of them weren't used by anyone, but a few of them got a few users. Uh, so and I really like just talking about UI libraries. That's my thing. I nerd out about React and npm packages. So yeah, I guess I'll just try to share what I have learned from building these UI libraries, using them, and working with some of the people I had the pleasure to work with. The talk was initially titled "What Makes a Good UI Library," but I thought that instead of that, like I should just share what I learned, just share my experiences, just share uh, what I've been through. So yeah, why don't we get started? Um, so first of all, like I said, this is going to be me sharing my experience. I have mostly worked with projects with like at least 5-10 people. In UI libraries, I've worked on UI libraries like Supabase UI, and then when I switched to Web3. This is the UI library I started to build from scratch like 6-7 months ago, and as you can see, I actually had a decent number of people join me there. So I think. Like most projects, like all projects, coordination is the biggest problem. Building a good UI library, especially when you're working with a team, is all about coordinating your efforts, making sure that you are aligned, uh, especially when you are in a team bigger than 5 people, because you will be working on different components, you will be working on different parts. Someone might be working on documentation, so it's really important that everyone has the same set of ideas, same set of goals, uh, because a UI library has to be streamlined. A good UI library has to feel consistent. Uh, and yeah, you need to coordinate effort between your team. This is kind of a running meme inside of Web3, but I just thought it would be nice to share. Um, so one of the most important things, obviously, before you start doing anything with your UI library, like without before even writing a single line of code, is defining the why. Why are you building this UI library? Each, like, you must have used UI libraries like Chakra UI, you might have used Headless UI, you might have used Material UI. All of them have their own reasons, all of them have their own benefits, all of them have their own opinions. For example, Chakra UI is quite opinionated about the way it looks. It comes along with a lot of default styles built in. If you look at something like Radix or Headless UI, they don't come with any styling, but because they have different goals. The goals of Chakra UI are different than the goals of Radix or Headless. But when you are building your own, make sure that you have make sure that you have a clear vision in front of you. Like, this is what I want to build. Do you want to build something that lets people get started really quickly? Do you want to give people something that they can just use straight out of the box without having to worry too much about styling? Do you want to give them a lot of flexibility and you really want to focus on functionality or accessibility? Just define that beforehand. Define what you want to do. And again, this is obviously does not just apply to UI libraries. This is something you can apply to any software engineering project or like anything you do really. But this is something I found myself wasting a lot of time on quite a few of the projects I worked on, because halfway through the project finding out that people don't even know why they are building this and don't share the vision. It just it just wastes a lot of valuable time, and it usually leads to situations that are not pretty. So yeah, define the why, have a clear goal in mind, and only then start writing code. I know it's tempting when you have a really nice idea in your head that, hey, I just want to build this new UI library. That's what I had when I wanted to build one for Web3, because the space was so new. No one really had built anything at that time. But yeah, writing code before defining what I wanted to do just resulted in me having to get rid of that technical debt later on. So don't make that mistake. Another thing I really, if I could go back, I would probably invest more time in is choosing the dev tooling. Um, this might sound a bit weird or like an unpopular opinion, but I've just seen, so I've been in so many teams, and we have ended up wasting so much time on just migrating from one dev tool to another, like migrating from one monorepo setup to another, just because we did not make the right decision early on. Um, I think this is something that can be easily avoided if you just, before writing any significant amount of code, just decide on what you want to use as a team, especially when you're working on a UI library, because the you are building a dev tool, and you will be working with dev tools when you are working on these things locally. You might be using something like Storybook. You might be using things like, I don't know, chain set to publish your stuff to npm. You might be using semantic versioning, whatever is your stack. But just decide on that before you start. Decide on decide on a set of tools that you want to be using, and try not to move away from that, because the time you spent on migrating from one tool to another can actually be spent on, maybe creating a new component that you need to be working on, um, creating some documentation. I mean, people always say that they don't have time to work on documentation. So this is somewhere where you can save a lot of time, right? And this is usually the stack I found myself using, not always, but let's say the last few projects I did before uh, switching my jobs, pretty much last month. I'm not an engineer anymore. Uh, it was good while it lasted, but yeah. But this is the stack. This is the stack we use for most of our projects. Storybook, you might have heard of that. Well, let me just show you a Storybook for Chakra UI. It basically lets you uh, preview all of your components when you are working on them locally, uh, in with different variants in different states, so that you don't actually have to, maybe create a Next.js app and import your stuff there and try to see how it looks. This is where it's really useful, and as you can see, it's actually deployed, so your users can actually browse through your entire set of components as well. So Storybook, great tool. I pretty much use this in all of my projects, and I think most projects use it. So yeah. um, Chain sets. I should minimize my slides again. Chain sets is this neat tool I heard about from with Hart, actually, who is one of the core maintainers on Chakra UI. I was lucky enough to work with him on this project of mine, which is called Web3 UI. Um, this is him. He actually told me about chain sets when I was setting up my project. It makes managing versions for your npm packages so much easier, especially if it's a monorepo. It's literally a hack if it's a monorepo. So definitely check this out. Plus pre-construct. This is like a slightly less popular tool, but and I don't even know what's a good definition for it. They don't even have one on their website. It just says that Devin build your code painlessly, and that's pretty accurate. It will make your life really easy as a maintainer. Um, but I guess to sum it up, it just makes uh, it just makes like maintaining your monorepo easier in the sense that it manages uh, the node modules in your monorepo. It's, if you can think of it as an alternative to Yarn workspaces or Lerna. It's really neat. Definitely check that out. And yeah, React testing library. I guess everyone must have heard of that already. If you have not, check it out. I mean, you need it for tests, snapshot tests, whatever. Uh, Pretty much essential. So yeah, have a look if you haven't heard, used this before. But that's the stack I found myself using pretty much lately. Good. I don't think you can go wrong with this. And of course, React and TypeScript on top of this. Cool. Let's move on. So API design. Um so when I started building my first UI library, it wasn't actually one of my own projects. I was just contributing to um someone else's project. I didn't. This is the thing I least expected to spend time on, but I actually ended up spending a lot of time on just deciding what's a good API. And if you don't know what I mean by API design, let me just give you a quick example. Um, so API design is just basically deciding how you want people to consume your components, how you want them to use it in their code. So as you can see here, uh, these are a set of components from the form ecosystem from Chakra UI. When you use input left add-on an input inside of an input group, it actually does something in a meaningful way because that's the way they were designed. That's the way that API was designed. This is the way they are supposed to be used. But if you wanted to do something different, maybe you could do something like input left add-on, I don't know, 1 2 3, and both of these are valid choices. It's just that Chakra UI decided to go with this. And this approach is actually called something called a compound component. You can read about that more. Uh, but both of these are valid choices, but it's up to you as the maintainer of the library to decide how you want people to use them, what makes the most sense. And it's a really difficult thing to do. You have to find the right balance between giving people enough flexibility while also making it easy to use, to make sure that they don't have to pass in all the things in the world to even use it. Um, it's it's a dilemma, and I've spent hours and hours sometimes just figuring out which one is better. So one of the tips I received again from Mr. Withard, who actually worked on Chakra UI as a core contributor, is to set up a snapshot releases in change set. If I can pull up the page for it. Yep, there we go. So snapshot releases basically let you create beta publishes for your npm package. So I think most if you are building a UI library, you will be publishing it to npm either as a private package or a public package. So what you can do is you can actually just create a beta version for all of the different API design choices that you have in mind. And this is something you want to be doing very early on. You don't want to be uh, even thinking about this later on in your project, because like it is important that the API design choices in your library are consistent throughout your library. You don't want to surprise people. Like if I know how to use an input from Chakra UI, I probably also know how to use, let's say, a grid from Chakra UI because it shares the same sort of a syntax, right? So very early on in your project, just pick one component, build 3 or 4 different variations for it with different API designs, publish them to npm, get people to try them out yourself, just get feedback on it, and then decide on which one you want to go ahead with. which one feels the most, not necessarily the most comfortable, but the most aligned with the goals of your library. That's the most important. Again, I will keep repeating this again and again. Uh, Make sure that people and your code are very well aligned with your vision for the library. Cool. The next is look and feel. Of course, UI library has to look good. It has to feel good. If your library does not look good, I doubt anyone will use it. I mean, the reason why I love Chakra UI so much, apart from the fact that one of my good friends was a core contributor on it, is that it just looks so good out of the box. But yeah, this is one more thing that you want to get out of your way before you start working on it. It's less important. I would definitely say that it's much more less important than the other things. You can always change like drastically change your styles later on without too much of a hassle if your code is set up that way. But again, this goes along with what I've been saying about being aligned with your vision for the library. um, just make sure you have some sort of a theme in mind. uh, I mean, you don't have to, but if you do have it, like if you do have like a slight idea of how you want things to look before you start, it really helps you and your teammates stay on the same page when they build things. um, this is again not something that's going to like break your project. If you don't get right, you can always change it later on. Material UI is one of the good examples. They have changed the way their project looks so much over the years. But I found it helpful to just get a decent idea in Figma before I started building my components and sharing it with my teammates. Um, yeah Okay, the next step is documenting stuff. Now I know we as engineers, this is not our favorite activity. Documentation, it can be boring sometimes. Actually, a lot of most of the times. But if you are building an open source project, if you are building, again, this is not limited to UI libraries. You have to document all of your decisions, or at least as much as you can, especially when you're working with a lot of people who need this context when they work on things in the future. uh, this includes going back to my first point. Why you are building this UI library, what's your vision for it, why you want people to use it. um, when you when you are working with a team, for when you're building a UI library, you ideally want to set up like a document that has a list of guidelines around how can people go about building a component. um, so that you don't have to, of course, like when you're working with a team, you are not going to be building each and every component. So ideally, people should be just able to pick up issues, refer to that doc, and figure out all the things they need to keep in mind to make sure that the component that they are working on, or the feature that they are working on, the hook that they are working on, whatever, is streamlined and well aligned with the rest of your project. So again, just have as much context available async in a written form, documented properly. uh, this is especially important for your contributors. uh, even if you are working on a private project in an internal team, it saves you so many meetings. I can't tell you how many meetings I've done just because someone didn't have a good enough idea of how to, hey, how should I go about designing an API for this component, because we haven't really done that before and we haven't documented that before, right? It will save you hours and hours of work. uh, technical con Again, technical context, uh, vision for your project, how you want things to look, how you want things to feel, API design, how you want people to write tests, how much tests, uh, if you have any standards for test coverage, mention that. And yeah, just about anything else, any other context you that you feel might be helpful. Okay, and that's like the internal documentation for people who want to contribute to your project. The public facing documentation is for your users, the people who will actually be using your library. um, um, Again, you might have, you if you are React dev, you obviously have seen quite a few doc site about different UI libraries like Chakra UI, Material UI. They make it really easy for you to get started with using their stuff. So make sure that ideally you want to have a good, like a documentation site, a separate site for your docs. But if you are working on a small team, you can get started by just adding doc strings to your code and using Storybook to actually display them. Let me see if I can actually demo that. Um, we actually had done that in one of our projects. Yeah, I mean, if you just add doc strings to your project, to your code, it will actually show up in your Storybook. So if you don't have time to, create a separate documentation site like this one, and that's totally understandable in a small project, doc strings will do just fine. It's enough documentation for people to be able to use your stuff, but it's just not that pretty and not that convenient. But ideally, of course, you want to have that. You want to have that for your project. If you want a lot of user adoption, you want to have examples. Examples go a long way, showing people how they can use your stuff in a real world project. Um, and having pages like this one for individual components, and Chakra UI docs are so good at this. They show you how to use the components in different scenarios, so you don't even have to think about anything. And they also give you all the list of the props that you can use. It just covers everything. So yeah, make sure that there is enough documentation if you want people to consume your library. I was really bad at this until very recently, when I again got to work with a lot of people who have worked on things like Chakra UI, who have worked on things like Material UI. I learned a lot from them, and documentation is probably the biggest thing. That's the single biggest lesson I learned from these maintainers who have been in this space for I don't know how many years, 6 7 years. More documentation will never hurt. That's the key. Accessibility, again, very important, and unfortunately this issue gets ignored by most projects. Um, and some people try to come up with their own solution for it, which is, I mean, I'm sure it's done with good intentions, but when you can use just you can just use something like Radix. When you can just use something like Radix UI or Headless UI, you should just do that, because these guys have spent so much time on making sure that their components are meet the standards for good accessibility. uh, it just doesn't make sense for you, if you are starting a new UI library, to just reinvent the wheel and do all of this all over again. Just use the primitives that they have. They have this really nice library of components. You have your sliders, tabs, toggles, basically anything you need, navigation menus, right? Just use this. Or, I mean, headless UI is not that great, even though it's touted as like an accessible library, but I've seen a lot of issues with it. So I highly recommend Radix instead. Uh, just use these primitives. Don't waste time on trying to make your stuff accessible by yourself. Make it accessible. That's very important. just for good karma and make people's life easier. um, Apart from that, as some final notes, I guess, just to recap on the things I've said. Coordinate coordinate efforts from your team. If you're working on a team, make sure you spend enough time on making sure that everyone is on the same page. Try to use existing tools like Radix. Pick pick dev tools before you start and stick with them. Don't change things around a lot. It's really not that important, and the tools that I mentioned, they will do just fine, right? And yeah, just find out ways to get feedback from your users using snapshot releases or nightly releases or any other workflow you might want. um, Document stuff, document your decisions. That will go a long way, and I cannot stress that enough. Document decisions, document context, so that even if you are not there tomorrow, people can still working on the project. And yeah, thank you for listening to my gibberish for 20 minutes. This was just my experience with UI libraries. Thank you.